Well, I want to get a little bit of a continuation on that story that I said that I was trying to research, and I have not really came up with any solid information. I've come up with information that can confirm the story in some ways, but then I don't really have anything solid. But the story I have is that my great grandfather was the illegitimate son of a Duke of England. Now, when you're looking at English peerage, the number of dukes is a very short list. So I was trying to determine who he was. Then I says, well, maybe he wasn't a duke. Maybe they got this story wrong. But then I thought to myself, and I started digging in actually a little bit more of the personal history of some of the royalty and some of the juicier stories that are not on Wikipedia. I actually started thinking, well, it might have been Edward VII. Actually, he was the son of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and he later became Edward VII. Now, he has a reputation for, well, he liked to smoke cigars. That was one thing. And he liked cigarettes, didn't smoke cigars. He said supposedly he smoked 12 large cigars a day and 20 cigarettes a day. He also was considered the most oversexed monarch in British history. So that pretty much fits the story too. He also made a lot of trips to Italy, and there was a lot of, and it was also during a time when my great grandfather could have been born, because Edward would have been in his early 20s. That's not really out of the realm of impossibility. That I could say for sure. But then when I look at the actual stories surrounding Edward, and I mean, he was a conservative type guy in a lot of ways politically, and actually he was a figure that united a lot of the monarchs in Europe. Actually there was an alliance between Italy and UK and Russia due to his efforts. He was very much a person that was in the limelight too. He had a long military career. A lot of it was titles, but then again, he was actually in battles, and I think he retired from military service at a very old age. I think it was in his 70s or 76, I believe. But it was interesting that, I says, if it's any person that would be the father that would have been that Duke, who the Duke would have been, he was the Duke at that time. He was the Duke until Queen Victoria died in 1901, and then he became King Edward VII. But if anybody would have fit the bill, that it would have been Edward. I don't know if this is true or not, and I'm going to try to do further research on it. But actually, I think he had more than one illegitimate child. I think because he was known as a person. Well, supposedly he made Bill Clinton look like a monk, if you want to just put it that way. But he was politically, he was conservative. He was not a liberal. He was a conservative, but he was also a guy for the working class. So, I think he was actually a good monarch too. But there's a lot of interesting stories about him. Actually, they had he used to devour a lot of meals because to keep up his strength with the ladies. And there was also a time when a millionaire Indian prince was so impressed by this was later on when he was king, that His Majesty's sexual appetite, that he sent him an unforgettable birthday present, which was a golf bag made from an elephant's penis. So, I mean, if anybody would have been, the father of my great-grandfather in Italy, who made a lot of trips to Italy, who was also a duke, it would have been Edward. I don't know if this is true or not, but I can tell you that some of the stories I got, now this is actually my great-grandfather, I know that my mother's brother, my uncle, he had to write a paper in high school in the 30s. late 30s, that, what was his lineage, and he also got the information from his uncle, too, and from, I don't want to say his name, that he was, he basically, that would have been his grandfather, that would have been my great-grandfather, that his grandfather was the illegitimate son of a duke. And they used to call him the Duke in high school. That was my mother's brother. So I think the story's correct, but now I'm coming up with it's probably Edward. And this person's name, I don't want to say, does sound like Edward in Italian. I don't want to say what his name is. And he does look English. And a few other things didn't add up because I always wondered how the heck he acquired so much money to buy an entire city block in Bayonne, New Jersey. He actually had an entire city block in Bayonne, New Jersey. Now, what I've heard was, that now that I'm digging into what happened with Edward, there was a lot of, he had several illegitimate children because, he was probably the most oversexed monarch in British history, which I don't really think is a problem as long as it's hetero, which he was 100%. Which I could tell you what's a little more about that story because, you think things are like crazy today. Oh no, they were crazier back then. I tell you, they really were. So anyway, it turns out that I don't know how the heck my great-grandfather actually obtained the money for that. I was like thinking to myself, I don't know, I don't understand how he did it. He actually had an entire city. He actually bought an entire city block in Bayonne, and he wasn't stupid. I mean, he was a very smart man. But I'm also thinking that there was a lot of things where people got paid off to shut him up and things like that. I've read about with Edward. The other thing was that my great-grandfather specifically went to England, the UK, London, to get married with his young bride. They had their first child in London. I don't know if the second child was born in London. I think no, the second child was born in Piedmont, Italy. The third child was born in France. Then the fourth child was born in London again, actually literally under Big Ben because she did not make it back to the house. She was traveling back to the house, and this is, they didn't deliver children in hospitals back then. He was actually born literally under Big Ben. Then my grandmother was born in Italy. After that, they went back to Italy. And I'm thinking to myself, how is this guy traveling with a family back from London to Italy? London, Italy. How's he doing it? He was a young guy. He was like in his 20s, right? How is he affording this? And why London? I'm thinking to myself, maybe, it's kind of confirming this story. But, he's illegitimate, so he's not going to get anything. And also, he was Catholic. That's another thing. But in 1901, when Queen Victoria died, there was Edward VII actually became king again. Now, this is the young Queen Victoria with Prince Albert. Later on, Prince Albert actually died some years later, I think in the 1840s. And Queen Victoria was, on her own basically after that for most of her monarchy. But I think part of the reason, why Prince Albert died, he was actually upset with Edward, and, there was, because of all the things playing around and all that, but I don't think Edward was actually a conservative type guy. He just liked the ladies, he liked the cigars, he liked his military, career, and he actually made a lot of alliances in Europe. So it could have actually been him, because if you're looking at the list of dukes there's only one duke that would have really fit the right age when my great-grandfather was born. And I'm also looking at Edward was in Italy so many different times, all during the 1800s. He actually made the alliance with the King of Italy. It could have possibly, if it's a duke, it's got to be him. If you could actually prove that, my great-grandfather was the illegitimate son of a duke. But then again, his last name is only one last name like that. They made that name specifically for that reason. I'm thinking, why would he travel back to London? That was another thing. But I think Edward had a lot of illegitimate children, so, that's not really... But I was just curious about it, but I'm kind of wondering if it is him. Now, Edward was actually 100% heterosexual, and I'll give you even though he liked a lot of ladies, but I'll give you another crazy story here, because it kind of shows you what was going on in royalty. There was Prince of, it was a Prince Felix Yusupov, right? This was a Russian prince. Actually, he turned out to be the one that killed Rasputin. He was the one that actually killed Rasputin. This Russian prince was a transvestite, and he was considered the most beautiful transvestite in Europe. This was him, Felix Yusupov. And the Duke, Edward, was at this party, so he sees this blonde over there, and he's thinking it was a chick, and it turned out he didn't realize it was who it was, and he slipped a note. It was like, oh my God! He goes, that's how they, that was another thing where it confirmed like how Edward was always trying to get in with the ladies, but he didn't get in with this one because it was a guy. But that also tells you about, some of the stuff that was going on way back when. You talk about, the rumors with the Obamas and all that type of stuff. I don't know, man. Maybe Joan Rivers. I think Joan Rivers is right about that. But that was another thing I picked up on. That was, this Felix Yusupov was going around as a hot blonde or something like that. But anyway, Edward VII became coronated as king in 1901. Now that's when my great-grandfather also traveled back to UK. Now I know he was when he was in the UK. I know he was in there in the 1890s. I know this from documentation. I know he was in London. I know he was specifically in London in 1901 because it's on the census. Now the story is that he tried to apply for the position of Duke. Now, I know why he would definitely not get it. For one, he's illegitimate. Two, he's Roman Catholic, so hang it up. But that also kind of dovetails into why he went back there specifically in 1901 to London. And he was a resident because he wasn't on a vacation, because he was on the UK census. So I'm not 110% sure about this whole story, but every time I look around I say, well, there's something else. But I'm sure I'm going to tell Rocky the cat that, Rocky, guess what? You got blue blood. You know what I mean? That's why I treat you like you're a duke. Rocky the cat gets treated just like royalty all the time. So anyway, I don't know where this story could actually go to. It's been a lot of research, a lot of dead ends. I really don't know what the heck the deal is, to tell you the truth. I know a lot of circumstantial things that dovetail into the right timeline. Now, nobody ever told me it was Edward, but everybody's telling me it's a duke, but there's not that many dukes. I also, like I said, I'll repeat it again. My great-grandfather's last name was made up specifically. There's only one last name like that because the story is his father was a duke. I don't know if this is all correct. I don't know. But I'm looking at how the heck did he travel? Why did he travel to the UK in his early 20s to get married? Why did he have a child there in the UK specifically? Why did he go? Then he goes back to several years later. He goes back to Italy. Then he goes to France. Then he goes to London again. He has another child. Then he's back to Italy. There's another child then. And then he goes back in 1901 when King Edward VII is coronated, and that would dovetail into the story where he was trying to apply for the dukeship. I don't understand how you're supposed to apply for it, or you just... I know he wouldn't get it anyway because, like I said, he's illegitimate for one, and I think from the stories I know that Edward had several illegitimate children. And he was, that was one of the things that was going on. So, anyway, Rocky just doesn't care, though. He's like thinking, well, as long as I got my cat food. So, anyway, that's my follow-up on this story. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find any more because it's been, it's been a lot of dead ends. And, I do look at the picture of my great-grandfather, though. He definitely does not appear to be Italian. He does look like an Englishman. That's what they told me. He always looked like an Englishman. And, some of the things about, the travel and, some of the things he accumulated and all that, it just kind of dovetails into it. But I'm kind of thinking he might be the son of Edward. He might be. I don't. And it's if I could actually say for certain that my great grandfather was the son of a duke specifically, which is what the story they've been saying for decades. Like I know that was the story back in the 30s for sure because of my uncle's papers and research papers that he got from his uncle. Now you're talking about his uncle was a CPA in New York. I mean, he's a stickler for accuracy. My uncle was very learned. He used to work with him. A stickler for accuracy, and he would have known personally my great grandfather till he was at least, my uncle was 25, and he knew the story about the Duke. And in high school, after he wrote that paper, because they had to write the paper, who your father is, who your grandfather is. They refer to him as the Duke, and I'm thinking Edward, he would fit it. He traveled to Italy many, many, many times. He was about 20-something years old when my great-grandfather would have been born. He was and Edward was a ladies' man. Could very well be, but I don't know yet, and I probably never will know. But the more I dig into this, it's a plausible story, but it's not a provable story. But I just figured I'd put it out here for just the hell of it, the heck of it. And it's a matter of maybe Rocky the cat will be someday interested in this story, and he can pass it on to his kittens, but he can't because he's fixed anyway. So anyway, that's my story, and I don't think I'll be able to get any more research, but I'm going to keep trying to get more documents from the UK because I have my great-grandfather's, one of his daughters was born in London, and one of his sons was born in London, and there's documents on that. And there's also the census papers. And, maybe that'll reveal something else that I can research something else and eventually get this story out. But it might take me a long time before I actually figure out exactly what it is. But right now, I'm actually believing this story, although I can't prove it.